Hey there, Commercial Construction Coffee Talk fans. Thanks for chiming in. My name's David Corson. I'm your host. I'm also the publisher and editor of Commercial Construction and Renovation magazine. This is what it used to look like when we used to print it. We're digital now. But actually, I've been breaking out the archives. This is September, October of 2007. Someone I've known forever, Mr. Frank Mark. He was the director of construction of Urban Brands way back when. He's been in a couple other retailers. That's the nature of the retail gig. It's like a conveyor belt. They go from one brand to the other. Some people stay there for 40 years. But this was a great looking issue, and I was showing all the recent issues. But it's really cool to go back into history and look at what was going on in 2007. And I had a little more hair there, and my hair wasn't as gray when I look at myself in my publisher's picture. But this issue looked great, and so thanks, Frank, for gracing the cover way back when in 2007. But we're digital now, so you got to catch us on the web, and we thoroughly appreciate everybody that's been finding us out there. We had about 29 million people hit the site last year, so hopefully you'll continue their ways consuming content, and got my next issue coming out hopefully tomorrow if it posts. I'm waiting for my last few pages to proof, and we'll post that puppy and we'll get it up there and then move on and do it all again next month. So hope everybody listen. It's basically springtime down here. It's pollen season, and everything's green. You don't wash your car, because the minute you do, it's got a green film on it. And all the trees are blooming. We had a little chill, so I got a sweatshirt, and I'm a little wrapped up here today, but sunny, but a little chilly. But spring's coming, and looking forward to the pollen leaving. And it's beautiful here in the South in April, May, and then all of a sudden, like in the middle of June, boom, the humidity comes, and it's hot and sticky, And I always say, do you like the dry heat or do you like the wet heat? Personally, I'd rather be in 110 out in Phoenix with a dry heat than 98% humidity at 95 in Atlanta. I don't know. Some people like it the other way. That's the way I like it. But I got my new jersey. Been waiting for it forever. This is University of Denver, and it's got our 9 national championships. We're in the semifinals for the NCHC tournament. That's the division that we play in, and that's this weekend. And the winner of that gets an automatic bid to the NCAA tourney. We won the tournament last year, so we're hoping we can repeat. And my jersey's got 9 on it because we're 9 national championships. If we win it to get the big dance, that'll be in Tampa in May. That'll be number 10. It'll be the only school in D1 ice hockey that has 10 national championships. So good luck to the Pios on the frozen pond up in Minneapolis this weekend. Let's win that semifinal game, and then go into the finals on Saturday and win it all. I'm a lacrosse player too. I've got my sticks behind me, and we're playing the Buckeyes. We lost to Yale last weekend. We got we're just out of the top 20, but tough loss. We got to win this weekend, and then we go into league play. So I know what I'll be doing on tomorrow night, and hopefully the rest of the weekend, at least on the frozen pond. And then the Pios play late Saturday afternoon, and I know I'll be yelling at the laptop. So I'm a DU alum lacrosse player. So it's kind of that blood, you got to root for the boys, and Coach Tierney's retiring after 42 years this year. So it's like a swan song for us. We'd love to see him go out, win a national championship. He's got 7 of them already. He's going to go into the College Hall of Fame. The U.S. lacrosse facility in Maryland is named after him. I mean, the guy's an unbelievable, super professional. It does a lot for the local sports youth around Denver, and it'd be really great. It'd be a movie, if he could go out that way. But there's a lot of good teams. Any 20 top team can beat any other team on any given day. So it's just about having momentum, being healthy, and having a hot goalie. But anyway, hopefully that will work out for them. So go Pios and all the other sports out there on the DU campus. Today, I've got a special gentleman. He actually, his publicist, once again, the publishers reached out to me, and I saw this project that they're designing, and his name is Charles Swift, and he is the acting director of the National Museum for the U.S. Navy. So, Charles, you're in D.C., correct?
I am in DC at the Washington Navy Yard.
Yeah. So,
Although I'm broad.
so I was going to say hello from the Navy Yard. You beat me to the punch.
Absolutely, yeah. The Washington Navy Yard, it's the oldest Navy shore establishment, founded in 1799. So it has seen a
Wow.
lot of American history.
I'm all about Americana. I always like the reuse projects, whether it's an old hotel or a building that's been transferred, but they'll keep some of the old fixtures and building, and it's an amazing thing to see buildings still standing that were built way back when, and then have that modernization and technology intertwined as we move forward. And I grew up in Philly, so we have the Philly shipyard there where they have all the
Of
mothballs,
course, yeah.
and they're all tied up there, right, on the Delaware River. And
Right.
used to go down there all the time looking at the ships. And my family's in recycling construction since 1888. So we used to have a recycling plant right down there. So whenever we go and see all the cars get crushed or whatever, my grandfather, he would take the grandsons and we'd all go down into the shipyard, way back in the day. And so very familiar with the Navy. And it's but being at the Navy Yard at a location like that's built way back when, every day's got to be exciting.
Every day, from my desk, I look out at a building where Abraham Lincoln would come down to the Navy Yard to smoke cigars during the Civil War with Admiral John Dahlgren. I'm about 30 yards away from the site where, when the unknown soldier was brought for burial at Arlington Cemetery, it was disembarked from the ship right there at the Washington Navy Yard. And the building that I'm in, the current museum, is Building 76, which was a naval gun factory for years. And in fact, a lot of the big guns that were used on World War II battleships were actually made in the building where I currently work. So, everywhere you turn at the Navy Yard, you're surrounded by history.
For those of you who haven't been to Washington, D.C., it's not a huge place, but it's got so much history in it. I did a retreat, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. And after our event was over on Saturday, we went from the Lincoln Memorial, and we did the walk all the way down to the Capitol. And it was, we looked at all the buildings, and I don't know how many miles I walked that day, and it was a beautiful day. So, it was, we did it in September, or it may have been late August. It was actually, Congress was out of session, so the town wasn't that busy, so I could get the hotel and, all that stuff, because whenever, it's tough getting that stuff when they're in session. It was, I had been done to DC, but I hadn't really done it where, end to end. And same thing when I did our retreat in Philadelphia. We did the tour, we had a guide, and seeing the Liberty Bell and getting all the stories. But if you've never been to DC, you really should go there, because there's so many special places. I think Arlington Cemetery is one of the most solemn places that you can go to as an American, and see the sacrifice that all of these people gave their lives, so we could live free. And it's just a very, very monumental as well as memorable place to go. So if it's on it, that would be something I would add to your bucket list. If you haven't gone to DC and taken the tour and spent a couple of days, it's a great place. Don't do it in the winter. Yeah. Do it in the spring and the summer. And if you go there in August, they're out of set. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. If you go there, go in August, you'll get a hotel room. You'll be able to find one, and they're out of session. And the reason why, can I say one more thing and I'm going to let you go? And I'm going to let you
go ahead. Yeah.
The reason why they had Congress, they don't go in session in August, is, I forget what year it was, but it was so hot one summer that they just said, go home and we'll pick up in about a month. Now we have HVAC, and I think they should stay there now, because they, most of the buildings are all cool. They're not sitting in what they were way back when. But I'm sure it's good for them to get back and talk to their constituents and all of that. But that's really the reason why they left. That's why they go out of session in August, because it was so hot. They said, we're getting out of here. So, but Charles, the way this interview works is we do it in three parts. You're gonna just kind of give me your brief history of where you grew up, brothers, sisters, where you went to school, and how you ended up with the with the U.S. Navy Museum, and then we'll talk about the last couple of years of the shutdown and the roller coaster that we've all gone through, and lessons learned, and how your department kind of operated and weathered the storm per se, and then you could talk about your project. So I'm sure our audience out there, Commercial Construction Coffee Talk, would like to know about that. And then you'll leave one positive thought or phrase and we'll close it out. So with that said, the floor is yours. Tell us your story, Charles.
Well, I'm Charles Swift. I'm the acting director of the National Museum of the United States Navy. I'm also the program manager for the new Navy Museum project. I'm officially a museum curator by training. That's what the federal government hired me to be, a supervisory museum curator, but that encompasses a whole lot of different kinds of work. I got my start being born in Iowa, born and raised, attended the University of Iowa.
Oh, Hawkeye.
I am a Hawkeye, yeah. So you were giving the rundown of NCAA. The Iowa women's basketball team has had quite a year. So
I forgot, I forgot about, sorry about all your hardcourt guys, it's March Madness too. So, Iowa always has a good basketball team, men's or women's, so it goes without saying.
Well, I have a couple of sisters and a brother. And my segue is that I moved to Boston to do a master's degree in history at Northeastern University, whose women's hockey team is now in the Final Four. So there's a little bit of ice time for you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Go Huskies, right?
Yeah, go Huskies. That's exactly right. So while I was at Northeastern doing a master's degree in history, I got my first job in a museum on a museum exhibition project. And I hadn't really thought of working in a museum before. I'd always thought of myself as more of a researcher and a writer, possibly becoming an academic. But, this first museum project that I worked on was about a neighborhood in Boston that had been torn down in the urban renewal projects of the 1950s, Boston's West End. And so, great, they were going to do an evaluation of, the West End being torn down, 30 years later, and talk to residents of the neighborhood and talk to the developers that, built the projects that replaced it and all these things. And from that very first museum job, I learned something or was told something or asked something that I've carried with me ever since. And, as you might imagine, in an urban renewal project, there's a lot of debate and a lot of controversy. Certainly the people whose neighborhood is being torn down, have a viewpoint. The city has a viewpoint. And I was talking to one of the people who had grown up in that neighborhood and was about 11 years old when it was torn down in 1958. And I'm talking to Jimmy, and I say, yeah, the city wanted to do this and this and this, and this was the reason why they, were thinking, tore down the West End. And he looks at me, and he says, Charles, whose side are you on anyway? And I always like to think of history as being neutral or that we're being objective, but it's important to remember, and learning that very early on, that no matter what you do, people are going to see it as, taking a side, having a point of view, which is okay. But you keep that in the back of your head. I always hear that because there's going to be somebody, especially when we're talking about, recent history, that's going to say to you, well, I was there and that's not the way that it was. And so you have to be ready for that. Mm-hmm. But back to the sort of personal history stuff. I moved down to DC after getting a master's at Northeastern. I did some work in historic preservation, did some work for a place called National Parks and Conservation Association, and then started a PhD program in history at the University of Delaware. I got almost all the way through it. I didn't write a dissertation because I took a job with a software company that a friend of mine had started. Which was a really important turning point for me. Going to work for, being one of the first 10 employees at a software company in 1998, as the internet boom is really ramping up, is a real education. We went from 10 employees in 1998 to 150 employees in 2001. And so, for somebody who's a historian, this isn't, my normal field of operations. So watching the decisions that were made as that firm grew and how you incorporate new employees, how you onboard them, train them, retain them, has become increasingly important for me as I ramp up my own project now to start a new museum, moving from, 25 people to 70 people, in a period of 5 years. So it's one of these things that, if you'd said, 5 years ago, would this work have been applicable to what you're doing? I'd say no, but now, having gone through it, it was very, very valuable. And so, coming out of that, software experience, I was an information architect, if you can believe it. My friends just laugh. It doesn't involve architecture and it doesn't involve history, but it does involve large scale data projects. But coming out of that experience and getting that sort of real world business experience was what enabled me to pivot to what I did next, which was, start a series of director positions in Boston with various historical organizations, culminating as the director of a small museum in Boston from about 2008 to about 2013. But that pivot wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't spent that time in the private sector, learning and observing business best practices. If I had just stayed a historian, that field would not have opened up to me. Mm-hmm. But I made that decision to leave the PhD program and make the pivot to software, simply because of looking at data, that the way the history PhD market was going in 1997, 98, it just didn't seem like that was the future. Mm-hmm. And I think I've been borne out. The increasing number of, say, adjunct professors in academia, it just wasn't going to be the way it was going to work. But that director position in Boston prepared me to be able to start work as the managing director at the United States Naval Academy Museum in Annapolis, Maryland. And so I spent 5 years there. And then in 2020, the summer of 2020, I joined this National Museum of the United States Navy as the project coordinator. And now I've moved up to acting director and the program manager to build this new museum. But there were a couple of just very sort of left field choices that put me into this position that aren't the normal path, I think, that you'd see a historian take to museum work.
So. It's two things. Boston, another very historical city. Yeah. Once again, I know plenty of you've been to Boston, but if you've never done the tour where you can take the pathway all through downtown, where our forefathers, during the Revolution War, where they actually walked and so forth, there's another bucket list for you to go and take the the pathway tour. It's an awesome thing to do. The second thing is actually, believe it or not, my grandfather, when they got out of World War II, they came back and they were recycling all the steel and the Jeeps and the tanks. Anyway, they were in the cars, and they have a museum. It's now they've sold all the cars and someone's bought it out, but it used to be called Mayor Pollock Auto Showcase. And they had old Model Ts and just really old cars, and they would restore them. But one of the things they did, they went out and they bought all the SKU and all the manuals for all of these vehicles. So if you needed a certain part, this is before the internet, where right. you write a letter and put a stamp on it, or, make a phone call on the old dial-up phones. But they had all the SKUs for all these different cars. They probably had, I don't know, 300 or 400 cars that were in the museum. It was 3 floors. It was I grew up in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 minutes west of Philadelphia on the Schuylkill Expressway, just about 15 minutes west of Valley Forge. But anyway, it was an old building, and they did all the restoration on the main floor, and then the upper 2 floors were where they had the museum. And I remember growing up, we would go in there and we would play. They had their office, but you could take the tour and you could see, the transformation from the Model T, the first combustion engine, to they even had all the way up to the Clockwork Orange car that was in the movie. and everything in between. And the work that they did was, I mean, the cars were beautiful. I mean, they used to find these things, you know, in the junkyard or, you know, covered up in West Virginia someplace. They bring it in and they would bring it back to life. And so I can totally appreciate your museum heritage, because I grew up with, you know, I'm obviously not as knowledgeable, but I have that that endearing for maintaining history and being able to, you know, say, hey, this is where things were and this is where we are today. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. I mean, while I was up in Boston, you know, one of the projects that I worked on up there was the restoration of the oldest house in Boston from 1661.
Wow.
Which was really interesting to see, you know, all of the old, you know, building envelope taken off to reveal 17th century timber and mud from the, you know, local bay that had been mashed together with marsh grass to, you know, fill in the cracks. I mean, it's, you know, so that, yeah, you know, the historic preservation part of it is what has always interested me. And that's my training, is urban and architectural history. And again, people say, well, you work for the Navy now. And I say, yes, but now I'm building a museum. So all of this knowledge that that I've had over time is actually coming into play. So I'm happy to see that.
So talk about the project. I mean, I got the press release, and you know, we have a federal section in our magazine. So the project's at pre-planning stage. So you know, we normally just discuss projects that have been completed. But what caught my eye was, you know, it was an historical museum. I didn't know actually where it was going to be, but I knew it was Navy related. And so talk about that. You know, what the aspect, you know, what's coming up, and you know what people can expect once the project is finished, and you know what they might see.
Sure. So to start, you know, we maintain our current museum on the Washington Navy Yard, the one that's in the circa 1889 gun factory. So, you know, we maintain public hours. We're open on Saturday now. We're doing a lot of work on the inside of the current museum, because even as we make plans to build a new museum, we still keep our, you know, our doors open to the public, because there's always a demand for naval history.
What's the square footage on that museum? What's the square footage on that?
It's about 90,000 square feet. It's a large building. You have to imagine it's one of these very long, it's about 100 yards long, very narrow. You know, you'd almost call it a shed if it weren't as tall as it is and made of brick, right? I mean, it has doors big enough for a, you know, a train to come into, because that was how they would move the guns around the Navy Yard. And, you know, it's a great, and there's, you know, there's gantry cranes that, you know, support, you know, 20 tons, you know, on the rails above the museum floor. And it's a great building, and people love the building. The problem with it is it's not well suited to being a modern museum. That, you know, the environmental controls of all of that open space, you know, maintaining, you know, good humidity and good temperature, it just doesn't work. And the other part about the current museum, which is a shame, is that it's on an active military base, and so access can be difficult. You know, it's no longer, you know, 50 years ago, you could walk onto the Washington Navy Yard, you know, just off the street, and that's no longer the case. So, you know, the impetus for this project, and keep in mind that the building that we were in opened as a museum in 1962, and it was always planned to be a temporary museum, but you know how these things work sometimes.
Right.
But the impetus for this is to get a modern museum that meets, you know, modern museum standards for taking care of the objects that you put into it, that is also off of an active military base, so that the public can easily visit. Because that's the hardest thing, is for, you know, is to have a museum but not have people be able to have access to it. You know, and you know, your audience works in construction, and you know, thinking about the tolerances for a museum in terms of maintaining that, you know, that constant 50% humidity, 70 degrees temperature throughout all seasons. It's really difficult, because what museum objects like is not necessarily what people like. and they like to be, held very stable. Now, as we said, we are in the pre-planning stages for the new museum. We have gone through, we have assessed the size of the program that we need, so that's everything from, the size of galleries and, what those galleries might be, the number of galleries, atrium space, retail space for a museum shop, food service space. And that's one of the things that's interesting about a museum project is that, it's not just a museum, but there's commercial aspects of it too, and there's office aspects of it. It's a whole bunch of different things that are blended together, and sometimes they're an imperfect fit, and it's trying to find that balance that we're really working on in terms of getting the program right. So we've gone through and we've done the feasibility for the program. One other thing that we have to think about that a lot of places don't is we talk about macro artifacts. That these are things that require either special engineering characteristics to be placed in a building, or they're so big that you need to have a special path to get to them. For example, on our current museum floor in Building 76, we have a twin 5-inch gun mount from the USS Reno from World War II. It weighs 90 tons. Okay, if we want to put a 90-ton object in a new museum, that requires a lot of planning before you even get to choosing a project architect, before you even engage a construction firm. You have to be 100% sure that you want that 90-ton thing in your new museum, or airplanes, or anything else that's large and cumbersome and is going to add cost to the project. You have to be able to figure out, is this something that if we put in the museum we want there for 100 years? Those are the decisions that we're making before we even get to what's the building going to look like. And so there's some interesting considerations that we go through.
How big is the new building going to be, on a square footage, do you think?
So currently, we estimate the total building at about 270,000 square feet. About 100,000 square feet of that is gallery space. So, and that feels about right. And the way that we've done, our size assessment, we've looked at the other service museums that have been built recently, the Marine Corps Museum and the Army Museum, because those are pretty good stand-ins for the kind of sizing and staffing that we're going to end up doing as well. I will say that one difference between the Marine Corps and the Army museums is that my museum is part of Naval History and Heritage Command. So the Navy has stood up a separate command to handle all of its historical functions. So Naval History and Heritage Command has 10 museums. They do the maintenance for the USS Constitution in Boston. They have the historic submarine Nautilus in Groton. They have the Navy's library, operational archives. We do, outreach, fleet weeks. So there are a couple of hundred people who are devoted to the Navy history enterprise, so that we have a lot of support on the back end. A lot of historians and, people, who handle objects and artifacts and take care of things that aren't necessarily part of our museum, but they support us and the other museums that we run. So that, we're fortunate to have that, because we have a large base already of information and talent to draw on as we work on this project. So even though I said, we've started small at 25 people, the reality of it is that I've got all kinds of help on the back end when I need it, and that's great. But getting the program right and looking and saying, okay, 270,000 square feet, 100,000 square feet of gallery space, that's kind of what the Army is doing. It's kind of what the Marine Corps is doing. And so, now that we've got that, we've entered into the next stage where we say, okay, we figure that this is the right program, but how do we want the building to work? And when a museum person says, how do we want the building to work? We mean, how do we want a visitor to experience the building? And when we say a visitor, for a museum, we have many audiences. Our first audience is primarily veterans and active duty sailors. And that's our prime. Most museums will say, well, the public is our audience. Well, we start by saying, veterans and active duty folks are our audience, and then their families, and then the public. And so each of these groups has different ways that they're going to want to interact with the museum. So we say, okay, for the American public that doesn't necessarily know a lot about the Navy, we are going to have a series of galleries that we're calling the SEAS galleries: subsurface, surface, expeditionary, aviation, space. And these are galleries we're devoting, thousands of square feet to showing people what the Navy is doing today and introducing the Navy to the American public, because, it's their Navy. Mm-hmm. And so we want people to understand the depth and breadth of the Navy's scope. As I like to tell people, the Navy was down at the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench, 35,000 feet below sea level. It has been on the moon. It is in the International Space Station. It is around the globe. The Navy's reach and mission, isn't just warfighting. It's an important part of it, but the Navy has all of these other peacetime activities that it does. And the Navy is always in motion around the world. And so being able to tell people, here's what your Navy is doing literally today. You come to the museum and you go into the, these SEAS galleries that are talking about the Navy. It may look a little bit different tomorrow. Where is the fleet today? All of these things that the Navy does is really important to communicate to people. Because, if you're like me and you grow up in Iowa, you don't really necessarily think of the United States as being a maritime nation. But we are. We've got oceans on two sides of us. So much of our commerce is brought to us, overseas, the water. And I think that, when we talk a little bit about, what we've learned during the last 3 years, I think it's been a real eye-opener for a lot of people how dependent we are on supply chains and supply chains that travel over water. And, the Navy plays a big role in that. The guaranteeing of the freedom of seas is not necessarily something that, I think about when I'm in Iowa. But boy, when you go to the shelves of your stores, that's a large part of it. And so, getting that first piece of saying, here's what the Navy is today and here's what the Navy does. It helps explain the Navy. It gets people excited about the Navy. And then you move into the history galleries because, pretty much where the Navy is operating today, it has a long operational history. The Navy's been operating in the Mediterranean since the Barbary Wars in the early 1800s. The Navy has been operating in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, South America, all of these things, where we work today, the Navy has this long history. And so that's the idea. That's the big idea. That's a little bit different than the way a traditional history museum might approach it. We're going to talk to you about the stuff that you see around you today, the stuff that sailors are doing right now. And then we're going to show you how that relates back to the history and tell you the longer story so you understand how we got to the present. And I find that really exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're going to be able to use technology to be able to do a lot of this. There's so many stories that we want to tell. And one of the things that my command has done a lot of is a lot of digitization work, millions of photographs of, Navy ships and events and all of these histories and, and digitizing cruise books and log books and all kinds of information. We envision a museum where, if you served on a ship, you'll be able to walk up to a screen at some point in that museum and you'll see your ship in front of you. Or if you're a visitor from, Philadelphia, you can go into the World War II exhibit and see the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, when World War II started. And being able to use technology to personalize the experience so that the museum is never quite the same thing twice for people as they come in. And that doesn't even get me started on the artifacts that we have. the amazing, hundreds of thousands of objects that the Navy has in its collection that it can show to the public as well.
So when obviously, I'm in the commercial sector, so most commercial, like a retailer, they open up another store, they have an opening date, and then they back it up. That's how they kind of figure out their schedule. From the because they have to print circulars and the big hurrah with the opening, and then they figure out, okay, this is when we're going to break ground. This is when we want this done from a program management standpoint. So when is the museum? As an ETA, tentative, obviously, but when do you think it will be open?
So it helps to understand how this all gets funded, because that's the first thing that people ask us.
Well, yeah, it's all about the money. We got to pay for
it. Right. So people always ask, how is this going to get paid for? Does the government pay for this? And the answer is, we're doing it like the Marine Corps Museum did, and we're doing it like the Army Museum did, in which you have a private nonprofit foundation that does fundraising, and they raise money to build a new museum. So there's two different timelines. There's an ideal timeline that you could say, well, if I had all of the money in my hand, it would take me, X number of years to do the project. And then there's the fundraising timeline where, giving an estimate of how long it's going to take really depends on fundraising. Mm-hmm. And so, in an ideal world, museum projects of this size, you would say, from conception to, opening, is 7 years, right? Sort of an ideal path, because there's so much, there's so many little things that go into a museum that don't necessarily go into, say, a commercial office project. That there's just a longer time frame, and so we'll see. I mean, the foundation, Navy Museum Development Foundation, has started up. I know that they're working on this, and we'll see. I'm really excited for it, though, because we've had a lot of good public response to this. A lot of it is we've seen the Army and the Marine Corps open their musems. We want to do this next, right?
Oh yeah, so we understand the branches competition.
There's a little bit of competition, yeah, exactly, right. We're not above stoking a little bit of competition. But to get back to the thing that we're announcing next, and getting back to talking about how people use a building, what the museum is going to look like, how is it going to work on the inside. We have engaged in what we're calling an artistic ideas competition. It is not an architectural competition. It doesn't choose an architect for the project. Rather, it asked a series of questions for architectural firms to answer. And a lot of it was related to some of it's what the building might look like, but it's more the experience of the building. When a visitor goes in, what is the front entrance like? What is the atrium like? How do we put that big 5-inch gun mount somewhere in the museum where it makes sense? What might some of the exhibits look like? And we've been very gratified by this competition and the response that we had. We did a call for proposals. We had 37 firms submit proposals. We down selected to 5 finalists. I have seen the work of all 5 finalists. And one of the things that we told them is, like, we want you to think big. Don't limit yourself, to what you think we might want. We give you how we think the building should operate. We tell you what our audience is. We tell you what the gallery sizes are. But you tell us. You tell us how a building like this will work. When a visitor walks in, what do they feel? What's the emotional connection that they have? When they see it from the outside, how do you get a building that says this is a Navy museum and not some other type of building? And these 5 firms, some of the top architecture firms in the world, have come up with these amazing ideas that are all vastly different. I mean, I couldn't be more happy with what we got out of them. And we're going to be publicly announcing and publicly unveiling those plans on April 13th. So in about a month, everybody will get to see what we've been up to.
Oh,
And
that's
what we're
awesome.
really, it really is, because, what I'm really hoping, is that, faced with, these five wildly different ideas, is that, people are going to get excited and they're going to say, wow, we could have that. I mean, that's possible. We can do that. And that's really the thing for this project, is getting public enthusiasm about it and getting people to understand that, this is a museum for the Navy and also for, the American public. And we've been doing all of this work, and this segues into, what we've been doing for the past 3 years. I joined this project in the summer of 2020, right after a lot of things had shut down. And generally speaking, for a museum to shut down, that's a big deal because we're in the people business. We're in the showing people history business. Um, but in some ways, being able to take a break and being able to sit back and assess and say, wow, we've just gotten funding for a program office to build a new museum. We don't have to worry necessarily about the existing museum for a little bit. It gives us a break and allows us to reset. And it lets us say, okay, let's get started on this new project. One, how can this new project help our current museum? Because, we immediately start talking about, oh, let's start doing some prototyping, so when we open back up, some of the technology that we might use in the new museum will be available in the current museum, for example. But we also start talking about, to people. We've gone out to hundreds at this point of active duty sailors representing, all kinds of warfighting communities, and said to them, just point blank, we've talked to senior officers, junior officers, enlisted, and said, what do you want people to know about what you do? What about Navy history interests you? What are the tools of your trade? Like if you saw, if you were going to put a couple of things related to your job in a museum, what would those things be? And so we've really been talking to the people that, we're directing the museum towards, the active duty sailors, and been getting so much good feedback that we've then been able to say, okay, when we make these galleries, here are some of the large objects that we might put in. Here's the size that we might use. Here's the type of exhibit that we might need. So we've been able to take this time, and I don't want to call it downtime, but the sort of, closed to the public time, and really dig deep into the idea of a new museum and the kinds of things that we're going to do to make that museum work, for ultimately for our clients who are sailors and the public. And that process is ongoing. I mean, we will continue to do working groups. We will continue, even as we are, writing the exhibit labels, be talking to Navy folks and getting feedback, because that feedback loop is really important to us. Because, as a civilian, I don't know the Navy culture. And it's a little bit presumptuous to say, well, I'm an expert in Navy culture. I'm going to tell you, what you need. We're very conscious of that. And we're letting Navy folks tell us how they see themselves and how we're going to then reflect that back. And so we'll go back in, when we have these concepts, these artistic ideas for the new museum, we'll go back to the working groups and say, hey, are we getting it right so far? Do you see what we talked about, or what you talked about, or that suggestion of yours? Do you see that in this? And that's really, I think, empowering. The letting people know that feedback is playing a direct role in what we're doing.
Locally, the Navy PR officer here in Atlanta, I'm on their mailing list. How I got on there, I don't know. But anyway, they send me pictures of active duty sailors that are local in the Atlanta area. Someone could be on a ship, someone could be, overseas doing, and so it's not just, I see these pictures of them doing stuff, and it could be construction, it could be unloading a plane, it could be on the boat. And so your comment about we're just not a ship. We do a lot of things. The Navy does.
Yeah.
a little different than, like the Air Force. I mean, they all have their diversity, as far as being, multitaskers. But the Navy really, it's a special outfit, because I see the pictures of it, and I always post stuff, and that, so they can share with their families and friends. And but it's cool because I see them, they've joined, they're doing their part, and they're all doing different stuff that you wouldn't even think that even goes on. And this is some of the stuff that you'll be able to show in this museum once it's finished. I'll tell you,
Yeah.
one of the coolest things. My son works at Boeing. He's out of Charleston, and they have Patriots Point, where they have I forget which carrier is there, and they have a submarine. But just getting on the carrier and seeing how that was even conceived. The same thing. How long did that boat take to build? I don't know. Maybe several years, depending on the war. I don't know if the World War II started and that was already there. But you go on that ship and you see all the stuff that they had to figure out. Living quarters, feeding, medical. Where are we going to keep the ammunition so it doesn't, and the thing is massive. If you ever never been on an Air Force carrier, and now they're 10 times the
Oh,
size.
it's
But
yeah.
this one's huge, and they've got some old planes on the deck, and but it's a very neat thing. And if you built that and you go out to Patriots Point, and if I would work on that project in the Navy shipyard, hey, I worked on that project. Just like my son, when a 787 comes out, he's like, hey, I worked on that plane. So that
And that's a really good point. And I should mention that one of the things that we're also doing is we are talking to Navy civilians, and we are talking to family members of people who serve in the Navy, and making sure that they're represented in the new museum as well. I recently met with the captain of a Cold War era submarine, and he talked about his career, because nuclear submarines were such an important part of the Navy during his career. He spent 27 of his first 29 years in the Navy at sea. And he said, the wives and partners and families, of people like me should get medals. And that's a really important thing, that that we have to take this holistic approach, because there's a lot that goes into what makes the Navy possible and what makes the Navy run. And for every sailor, there's a family story beyond that as well, and that's really important to remember.
if any of our listeners out there on Commercial Construction Coffee Talk wanted to find out about this project, is there a website that they could go to, or how could they find out more about it?
There is, and I would suggest the best way to learn about this project is to Google National Museum of the United States Navy,
There you go. Google.
and yep, and check back in about a month, and you'll get to see all the pretty new ideas for the new museum.
Yeah, we just did our architecture report in our first issue of the year, and I always say, look, you wouldn't even recognize a restaurant what it looks like, 5 years from now. So
Yep.
I can't imagine what a modern museum will look like with old time artifacts in there, and all the other, they'll have retail, they'll have the office. Like you said, it's a hybrid of a bunch of things, and
Yeah.
and it's not tiny, several hundred thousand square feet, and
It's true.
um, so all you architects, designers, contractors, here's something you can really, look forward to. And then when it's finished, we can all go down there and walk it, and see what
Yeah.
see what Charles has come up with his team. So, Charles, if there was one positive thought or phrase as we finish up here, what would it be that you want to leave with our audience out there as we finish Q1, going into Q2, and the remainder of the years, and get ready for 2024? That'll be here before you know it. What would that be?
It's something that I learned working on a project at the Naval Academy, and I won't tell you what the project was, but it's something that I've observed over and over in the Navy. It is, if you don't care who gets credit, or if you're not concerned about getting credit for something, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. And I hold that in my head for this project because it is a long time horizon. There are going to be people who come into this project and leave this project before the project is ever done. I might not make it to the end of the project. Who knows? But we all do our parts to move it along. And as long as you're not concerned about being the person that gets credit for it, it's going to move along, and it's going to move along smartly. And that's really important to us.
Yeah, no ego involved here. It's like when they built the interstate highway across the country. There were so many different people that, some people had to dig through the granite to put but they
Yep.
probably didn't, and it's like any construction project. You've got, certain things come in first. Flooring's the last thing that usually will come in a commercial project, and then the thing's done. But I'll tell you, all our audience out there, they all like going into the stores that they've built and telling their family. I can just say, I
Uh,
worked, I built that, So when this
yeah.
project's done, even if you don't make it to the end, which I hope you do, uh,
Thank you.
you can say, hey, I was at the beginning of that.
Yeah.
And I was there when I saw all the original schematics of what it was going to be, and now it's actually come to fruition. That is,
But what I want to say is that the flip side of that is I want anybody who's served in the Navy to be able to walk into that museum when it's done and be able to see something that reflects what they did and be able to say, I see what I did reflected in this museum. And that's really, the thing that we keep in the back of our minds every day.
if someone wanted to reach out to you, how would they reach out to you? Or would they just go to the Navy Museum? Or
Yeah, because my email address is really long and complicated.
yeah,
but
no,
but what I yeah, I mean it's tough. But yeah, just I
there
my
might there,
email
there
is
might be some Navy vets that are architects or
yeah.
whatever, and say, hey, I didn't
So
even know this was going on.
so if people want to reach me, grab a pen and pencil. John dot C dot Swift 6 dot CIV at US dot Navy dot mil. Told you it was long.
Hey, that's why we're on. This is why it's on a video. So if you have to redo it, just hit the pause button and grab the scroll bar and go back, and you can write it all down. Um, Listen, this has been an awesome conversation. I love history. I come from a military family. Like I said, I've known a lot of my friends, were in the Navy, and I've walked a lot of ships over the years, and I can't wait to see when it's done. And obviously, it's a long process. But you know what? I'm not going anywhere. So
I'm not either.
yeah, I'm a patient man. I'm waiting for you know it's going to be exciting, and that'll be a trip that I would definitely go up there and see, because I've seen it just about everything else I can see. In DC, they haven't really built that much. They've redone hotels and this and that. This is probably a big gig in
It
DC.
is.
So
It
when
is.
it's finished, all you out there in commercial construction coffee talk, this is something that you would definitely probably want to go see. And while you're out there, you should go look at some of the other museums if you haven't been there, because there's so much historical stuff that it's just amazing. Our country's 200 plus years old, 225, whatever, not to be exact, but listen, there's a lot of stuff. And the federal government's one of the largest contractors in the world. They've been building buildings for hundreds and hundreds of years. So if you're in construction, go there, because this is something that's going to be an awesome thing to see. So if anybody wants to reach me out there, you can get me at davidc@ccr-mag.com. Listen, Charles got on there. The publicist sent me this project, and we're looking at it. And I reached out, and said, I'd love to have talk about it on the show. So if you have anything out there that's burning desire, by all means, send it to me. And we'll find a spot for it. And I look at everything. I might not get back to you right away, but I look at everything, and we'll find a place for it. Very tough to get into the magazine, but we got all the social media channels and all their stuff, and we can't find them. We'll create something for it. So with this said, well, Charles, this has been a pleasure. Good luck with your project. Good luck with the next month, in the middle of April, right before tax day.
Yes.
But you can, hey, look, they're gonna unveil the project, so it's a good marker. And anyway, some exciting things coming down the pike. I wish you success on the project, and the finish line is way down there, but eventually, someone's going to cross it. And I don't know, do they take a bottle of champagne and hit the door like they do with a ship, or is that the plan?
So what I envision, we have in our collection, we have numerous broken champagne bottles from the launching of ships. They put them in a wire cage so you don't get shrapnel in your eye, but we have a dozen of those. So my plan when the museum opens is, one, to break a bottle of champagne, but then to have on display the champagne bottles that christened other ships as well. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
See, he's thinking about everything. So
I try, man. It's been so good to be here.
Well, listen, we're going to leave on that positive note. So all you out there, if you're on the construction site, we want you to be safe. Make sure you're drinking lots of water and stay hydrated. Springtime's here, but the summer and the heat's coming. So ultimately, we want everybody safe and go home to your family. And, that's the most important thing. And having fun, building stuff with your hands and saying, hey, man, I built that. So just like I do my magazine every month, hey, might not be using hammers, but every month a new issue comes out. Hey, I built that, so I'm a constructor too. So Charles, enjoy the weekend. And for everybody out there, it's bracket time. Good luck with March Madness, trying to figure it all out. If you win all that, if you figure it all out, God, I don't know, God's on your side. But enjoy the weekend, recharge your battery, reset, because you're going to have to do it all next week. And Charles, if I come to DC, I'm going to look you up. And
absolutely.
And definitely, this would be something that I would, and if you're still on board, I definitely would love to come up for the opening. That would be something that I would definitely cover in the magazine. So
absolutely, you are on the list.
Awesome. That now I'm really excited. So anyway. Enjoy the springtime in DC. The trees are gonna be blooming, the cherry trees and all that stuff down by the monument. And everybody else out, enjoy the weekend, and we will see you next time on another episode of Commercial Construction Coffee Talk. Charles, good luck. All right, I look forward to meeting you.
Thanks, sir.
All right, see you later.